Welcome to the latest episode in the ENT Critical Targets podcast, which we look at the ways that the engineering, science and technology sectors can help create a better future for everyone. My special guest today is Coral James O'Connor. Coral is a senior lecturer at City University London. A particular area of research looks at how social media has altered the communication strategies of political parties, specifically around general election campaigns. I spoke to Coral on our Off the Page podcast looking at disinformation, and I've invited her back to become champion of the Trust and Truth category in our Critical Target series. We'll return to that shortly. First of all, good to see you again, Coral, and welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Tim. I'm glad to be back.
Right. Now, your research primarily looks at the way social media is used by politicians, both to communicate to the wider world, but also specifically within their own parties. Your data was taken from the 2019 election. What results or trends have emerged from that? And although I know it's not your area of, or your research hasn't extended to this far, but do you see any of those trends either fizzling out or magnifying in the UK's general election of 2024?
Well, that's a really interesting question because I think for 2019 election, we all know that was the Brexit election. So if you go back and you look at all of the media around that, let alone what was online, it was all about the Brexit election for that one. Of course, this time Brexit's not been mentioned hardly. So that in itself is quite fascinating. So this, so kind of when I look at social media, it's all about really how MPs used social media at that time. And as we know, social media has changed the game fundamentally in relation to how MPs communicate. We know that because everybody's rushing for that. If you look at pure analysis, I believe the UK is one of the top five. It's second for using online as a way of communicating when it comes to our legislators, right? So it's a major factor in what we do. So social media has definitely changed the game, and it changed it in a fundamental way. So individual MPs, they don't always speak with one voice in a campaign as they used to. Before you get the brochures, they would then be speaking directly to what the brochure said. That doesn't happen so much online. So the leaders, they think that they understand what's going on online. They think they understand that they're being supported online, but that's not necessarily what's happening. So there is a disconnect, and I would not be surprised if that's happening in the 2024 election as well. What MPs say online about policy related to what their leader says about policy is not often the same. That's what's coming out of the 2019 election. We see that with the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, certainly the Labour Party seem to have a handle on their leaders in the 2024, on their MPs, candidates in the 2024 election as it stands right now. But we will see what happens as we go on. Certainly, Brexit tactics are being used, the sign on the bus with the NHS and how much money they're going to get during that. That was being tried to be used with the tax, £2,000 in the election debate that we had this week. So we can see from that they are trying to kind of reach back to the 2019 election or even the 2016, referendum. They're still trying to track back to that and use those devices online to just spread that information. But it has to be said, it's a little bit unedifying to see our politicians being accused of lying. But then there's a little bit of me that thinks, wasn't it ever thus? I don't think there's much change in relation to what happens in the public, outside the public sphere in relation to, communication and how they communicate compared to what's happening online. So inside, if you like, the public sphere where people are in their homes and tweeting and sending out those messages in a different way online. So yeah, support for leader right now, I would say one of the fundamental things that I'm seeing change happen online. They all have their own media. They're all using it in their own way. And we'll see what happens. We're really at the beginning of the election campaign for the 2024. So we'll see what happens as we go along.
Do you think, and it's an interesting example you bring up, that 2000 tax bill raise pledge that the Tories made of Labour, that the speed with which that got into the public debate and was denounced by Labour and by the Treasury, has social media and the digital world increased the speed with which these sorts of things are dealt with. You're referring to the timescales that we're talking about. We are at the beginning of the election campaign, and Rishi Sunak should have been spent a full day, perhaps, at the D-Day celebrations yesterday. And we find on social media that he's trying to manage the situation the day after it. Because the whole debate is moving online now. Is the speed of the debate increased because of social media?
100%. Yes, absolutely. And what I thought was really interesting, if you compare the two leaders, the leader in relation to the difficulties that Keir Starmer had with
Diane Abbott.
Diane Abbott. Thank you very much. Yes. How could I forget this trailblazer, as they keep telling me every single day? With Diane Abbott, the difficulty they had with Diane Abbott and how long it took them to say, do you know what? Yes, she can stand. I'm sorry I didn't do it earlier. They didn't say I'm sorry, but it took them that long to say she can stand, it's not a problem with me, or at least Keir Starmer to say she can stand, it's not a problem with me. But with this latest thing with Sunak and D-Day, it has been really remarkable how quickly he came out and said, my fault, really sorry, absolutely, should have done that, and I didn't. And you know what? I think he learned a lesson from the Keir Starmer situation. And also, this is a major situation for Sunak, a really difficult one. And online, it's wildfire. So you have to catch that really, really quickly if you want to nip it in the bud. And those things you didn't need to do before, you would double down. They doubled down a little bit on tax. And then because they doubled down so much on tax, of course, then he left the D-Day commemorations to put his, that much. He was so, kind of like consumed by it all. He left to try and put that right. And in the end, he's made double trouble for himself. So it's really interesting. Social media now means you have to nip things in the bud a lot quicker than you ever had to do before. That's what I would say.
But equally, you can say that it is a tool that allows you to do that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that too. Like the nature of, legacy media, if you like to, which is what, it's called, if you like to say that, when we're looking at the press 24 hours before we get there, yes, it's online too. But really, in terms of being splashed so that you're walking past a newsagent's window, you can see the front page. It takes a long time to see the difference there. TV, yes, there's rolling news and you'll get that breaking, but you won't get the analysis that you need. But social media, you're going to get lots of people chiming in, and somewhere along the way, someone's going to win that debate, whether you think they've won it or not, because there are so many voices coming in. But somebody is going to win that race to this is my truth. And they keep saying this is my truth. Whether it's true or not is another thing. But because it happens so rapidly online, you're right. It's a quick way of just absolutely dispersing it. But on the other side, it's a quick way of it just exploding in front of you. And I think there was a bit of both for Sunak, for sure.
Okay. If we can move on, the EU, or we adopted in the UK, the EU's online safety bill. We adopted it last October. But do you think there's anything else that an incoming government should be looking at to improve people's security and trust in the digital world? And I could ask that one. Although I'm looking at from a UK perspective, this is these are policies that could be used throughout the world. What do we need to do globally to uh, make the online world a safer place?
It's so tricky, but I think we need to dissect, if you like, where we are in relation to the different cohorts within our community. Because what we are finding, or certainly what I'm finding, is if we look at the children in relation to Ofcom is our regulator in the UK. So they regulate online, they regulate TV, they regulate radio. It's a lot for one organisation to do. And my thoughts on this for some time actually has been that what we don't have is a children's digital regulator. We don't have that. And whilst Ofcom do regulate for children within their absolute huge remit, I do think that there needs to be a consideration for what's going on with young children in relation to social media and how they engage with it. Because although this regulation now, this EU online safety bill, is now supposed to look at how children are accessing social media, that's not necessarily being done. So their access is open. You know, they can say I'm 18 and then suddenly they're on a platform that they shouldn't be. And that's not being regulated online enough. So I think globally, we need to start to think individually within our countries, but there needs to be some kind of global reach in relation to how these countries talk to each other about how we monitor our children and the way that they use social media. You could say for the likes of you and I, Tim, we're old enough maybe to have remembered legacy media and how that was regulated. So we have some form of legacy, kind of reference in relation to regulating ourselves with the media that we find, that we question what is online and whether there is truth there or not. And yes, you could say for the 20 plus somethings, there is a real ability to discern what's truth and what's not. But I think for those under 20, for those that are children, under 18, I think it's a lot harder for them to do that. And I think if we don't, as a whole, look at regulation in relation to children individually from everyone else, I think we will have a problem in the future because they just don't understand that what they see online isn't necessarily true and it has to be questioned. Some would argue, for the academic, looking at the other side of point of view, some would argue that, well, hold on a minute, they do, because there are varying opinions online and they can follow one or the other. But as we've seen with all of the stories that have come out with children in relation to social media and their online experience, they're not making those choices. They're not discerning enough as we would be.
I would love to agree that was the sole problem almost, Coral, but I kind of think that if we move on to the general state of trust in globally, and particularly when you're looking across the Atlantic from here, is that if people don't like the news that they're reading, and this is of any age, they brand it as fake news. And this gains traction because there is so much fake news about anyway. And technology both aids and undermines it itself at the same time, if you like.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bigger issue just than a generational one, unfortunately. Do you think there's a way back from where we are at the moment?
I 100% think that there's a way back from where we are, but I also just want to push back a little bit, Tim, because you know what? Fake news was ever thus. I know Trump believes that he coined that phrase, but he didn't, right? The reality is that when I'll talk about general, I'll talk in general terms, but when, powerful countries wanted to change the regime, whether that's the UK, the US, or wherever, when they wanted to change the regime, the way they did that was by putting false stories into local newspapers in those territories where they wanted to change the regime. That could be argued to be fake news. In fact, it was fake news, right? So tearing down the political parties that were in power at that time, broke those down to then install who they wanted in power. That was fake news. So it was ever thus, is what I would say. I know it's difficult to like that at this time where we're in a real melee when it comes to especially US politics and the world in general. Actually, UK politics seems to be quite steady at the moment, but we'll see how we go. So there is always this concern about fake news and, are we understanding the truth of the matter? But I think in the end, it all boils down to the truth. We'll take Sunak and tax again. That was claimed to be the truth, but eventually there were difficulties with that truth. So all I think that social media is asking us to do is to regulate and regulate effectively, and also to be discerning. And I think if we can get those two things, that balance right, I 100% think that change will happen where this fake news will exhaust us all. It's more than it ever was before, don't get me wrong, that's very, very true. But like I say, it was ever thus. So for me, there is no fear with fake news. It just means that the verifiers have to verify and the fact checkers have to fact check a lot more clearly than they do. But will social media have those verifications and those fact checkers as you're giving your opinion on something? I doubt that very much. Will they have those regulators inside of social media as we're tweeting, as we're sending messages? I doubt that very much. But outside of that, we should be regulating. And if we regulate well, as I say, and if we understand how to separate the truth from the lie, then I think we have a fighting chance to fight fake news, as it's been coined in recent times again.
Okay. Well, if I could move away from that, because there are many issues around social media, and that's talking about the bigger picture in terms of conspiracy theories and so on. But social media clearly does have a role in just mental health. For example, links between social media and mental health are quite strong these days. And we created our critical target back in 2021. And I'll read it out to you. We just said traceability and accountability for everyone using online and social media platforms by 2025. Of all the critical targets that we created back then, this one had the shortest deadline. That's mainly because it is technologically achievable now. It just needs the commitment from governments and the big tech that operate the platforms. There are obstacles, specifically around privacy and freedom of speech, that makes them unwilling to go too far down this road. Why do you think they are so reluctant? Could they change, and do you think they should, given the freedom of speech argument?
Well, I think I always feel that freedom of speech is sacrosanct, but we do have bills. If people say things that are racist, or if they say things that are libelous, or if they, there are always ways, if they scandalize someone, there are always ways to make sure that those things are tackled. If they're racist, we've got the Race Equalities Act. I mean, there are ways of doing the things that we need, or Race Relations Act, should I say. There are ways of making sure that people cannot get away with saying the things they shouldn't say. and that it is traceable. You know, if someone says something online, they do try and find them. Not always find them, because sometimes they're anonymous, but they do try and find them, and sometimes they end up in court. So I think for me, as long as those avenues are always there, as long as we are legislating in any country that we're in against things that are quite clearly illegal online, whether you say something and you shouldn't say it, or whether it's libelous or scandalous or whatever the situation is, as long as that regulation is in place, it should be a lot easier and better, that discourse online. Right now, it probably is not. But I think the more and more people take people to court, you know, make those arguments at police stations, the better eventually it will be, because it will settle down. It's not like these laws are not in place. They are in place. It's whether people engage with the law when things are said and done online that are untrue, hurtful, dangerous, and damaging. If that's the case, there is legislation to tackle that. And it's about maybe informing the people that that is available to them. And it should be more readily available to them, I think, as well.
I think uh, you're absolutely right in that it's the legislation is there. But I actually had a look at the online safety bill, and it is designed to protect the online world from things like child sex abuse, terrorism, selling arms or drugs, people smuggling. There's a list, a long list there, but there are things of that nature. And what I'm really talking about is about bullying and just abuse online. And I still see that that is a problem. People feel that they are at liberty to say whatever they want when they're hiding behind a keyboard, and they are anonymous. Uh, and I hate to say it, but I'm a real football fan, and I plug into some of the football fan forums, and they are absolutely vile. Some of the tribalism that goes on in there, but all that sort of stuff is anonymous. And I guess my question or the idea of the critical target is that there should be some accountability, and I'm not sure whether the protections that we've got through things like the online safety bill are enough to add a bit more decency to the online community.
I totally understand what you mean, but I'm going to say to you, when you go to a football match and you're standing in opposition or quite next to the ones that are playing on the other side, the other supporters, do you not still get that abuse there? Because I think that's what it is in question. Yes, that happens, but doesn't it happen on the other side anyway when you go to a football match?
Um, uh, to be honest, these days not so much. I think because there is CCTV in grounds, if people are actually doing uh, the hate chanting, as they call it, or open racism, then these people will be phoned and barred from the games. So I do think that
Well, then
it's moved on.
Well, then, if it has moved on, maybe it's moved online. And if it has moved online, then again, the question is, who's regulating, who's monitoring that abuse online? And if they are not regulating and monitoring that abuse online, then they need to be reported, whether to the regulators to start, to the police to finish. That does need to be done. And yeah, I absolutely hear what you're saying, because we have these very powerful companies that have not enough regulation compared to your traditional companies, these legacy companies, if you like. These online companies have all the power and not much accountability. And that does need to be evidenced. But I would also argue that that's down to us. That's down to us pushing back and saying no more. And whilst the online safety bill is tackling that, I don't know, unless we, the people, make the difference, that it will make the difference. Because like you say, it's about horrifying behavior online. But that needs to be called out instantly as soon as that's done, as opposed to tolerating some of it, which is what I think a lot of people do online. They tolerate it, and then they leave. I think that needs to be switched on its head. And I think that does take legislation. It does take regulation. And I think those two hand in hand will make a better online world for everyone, and on a safe online world for everyone. But what I would also say is that can't happen without the people that it's happening to calling it out. And they are doing that more and more. And we are pushing our legislators to make the difference. And they are attempting to make the difference. But there is a little bit of me that is concerned that they are attempting to, but will it make the difference? Does it go far enough? I think it starts with no one being allowed to be anonymous online. But then some of them are humans, some of them are bots. So how do you legislate for that? It goes back to the owners of these organizations, and these organizations are not necessarily happy to make those changes. How do you make those changes? I don't have the answer to that question. All I can say is regulation and legislation together make a difference. To protect our young people, we need regulation. We need legislation that's open and fair and not expensive for people that do want to take those that are abusing online, them to court, whether that's in a private way or not. There needs to be that kind of protection for us as individuals.
Maybe. Great. Well, it's a great way to finish. If I could pick out something that from what you just said in the earlier part of that was, it's very easy to point the finger of blame at the social media platforms, but we all need to take a bit of responsibility for what's going on. But if we could leave it at that, I could thank you ever so much, Coral. It has been brilliant talking to you again. And thank you to everybody who's been listening to this podcast. This is one of 7 episodes in our Critical Target series. You can now listen to all episodes by searching for the ENT Critical Targets wherever you get your podcasts, or by visiting the podcast section on the ENT website.